Dark clouds shrouded the sky around the great castle that stood in the middle of a wasteland. The man in the cloak moved swiftly through the castle's corridors, sticking to the shadows, carefully observing his surroundings before moving forward. He reached the room where two large statues stood beside the doors leading to the Demon King. However, he didn't intend to enter that way. Instead, he slipped past and stopped by one of the castle's open windows. Looking down, he saw a demon guard on patrol, axe in hand, its body completely encased in armor. But the guard was no match for this stealthy man. He jumped down without a sound, approached, and slit the guard's throat. The demon collapsed, dying instantly, while he sheathed his sword, looking up at the rest of the towering castle. Then he took out a grappling hook and began to climb to the top. He reached a door that seemed to have a magical barrier blocking it, but the man quickly focused energy into his index finger, aiming at the magical barrier, and easily pierced through it, shattering the glass behind it at the same time. He undid the lock, opened the window, and stepped inside, standing high above, looking down on the Demon King's great throne. As he jumped down, the figure on the throne immediately sensed his presence, turning to face him and remarking that the castle had a rather interesting guest at this hour. But how did this man get here? And who was he? A few hours earlier, a group of people were resting and preparing their next plan in the Demon King's hall. They gathered around a map, thinking they could charge straight through the main doors. However, the man in the cloak wanted to take a different route, believing he was more than capable of pulling it off. The others in the group were shocked by this proposal and unanimously objected, saying it was impossible, or believing he would fall to his death. They all laughed at him, before the main girl in the group brought everyone back to attention. She said they would not change the original plan. This was the set battle strategy. Almeria the warrior, Seraphine the high priestess, Lena the mage, and Elvie the holy knight would do their best to draw the Demon King's attention. Meanwhile, Roland would hide in the shadows and use his assassination skills to finish off the enemy. Roland asked Almeria to confirm if she was really okay with him delivering the final blow, as he believed that responsibility belonged to the knight. But Almeria was confident in her plan, as it offered them the highest chance of success. They had been through so much to get here, and she believed they couldn't possibly fail. Roland was silent for a moment before saying he understood. Almeria smiled at his response and said they should take a short rest before proceeding together. Everyone then fell asleep before the battle. Roland also appeared to be sleeping, but he was actually just pretending. Quickly, he turned himself invisible and silently stepped out from their hiding spot. However, Almeria seemed to notice and asked where he was going. The black-haired man gave a small smile, saying he would be gone for a little while, which confused Almeria. That's when Roland explained he was just going to the bathroom, and jokingly asked if she wanted to come with him. Almeria blushed, flustered for having asked, and just told him to hurry up and come back. She wondered to herself why Roland was so calm. Regardless, Roland took the opportunity to slip away quietly, but not to go to the bathroom, but to face the Demon King. Now he stood before her as she prepared to attack him. Despite that, Roland was determined to give it his all to kill her. Lightning shot from the Demon King's hand, aiming straight for Roland, destroying everything around them and sending debris flying, but not a single bolt hit him. Roland was no longer where he had been, leaving no trace of where he might have vanished, much to the Demon King's confusion. But then she realized he was standing right behind her. The Demon King immediately spun around, launching another attack, but missed once again. She was starting to get annoyed by Roland's lightning-fast speed. Suddenly a voice rang out, asking when the last time she'd fought in a real battle was, and if she had ever seen skills like these before. Thinking she finally had a handle on the situation, the Demon King summoned a large sword and slashed in a specific direction, creating a massive fissure in the ground that seemed to tear the room apart. However, Roland was still nowhere to be seen. She scoffed, whipping her head around, trying to predict his location. Finally, the Demon King found Roland just inches away, his blade pressed against her forehead. Roland pulled his blade away, causing the Demon King to collapse to the ground, blood streaming from the wound on her head. Her head bowed in defeat. She declared that the Demon King's army would be disbanded, its remnants ordered to retreat and never threaten humanity again. However, Roland suddenly cut her off, saying that wasn't going to happen. He looked down at the Demon King with a cold gaze and asked if she had any last wishes. The Demon King looked up with a faint smile. After their brief exchange, Roland quickly left the castle. Meanwhile, Almeria and the others were on their way to the Demon King's castle, but by the time they arrived, they only found the Demon King collapsed on the ground, apparently dead before they could even join the fight. Roland returned to the city and was congratulated by the king. The king was incredibly impressed that the Demon King the most powerful and cruel being in history, could be defeated so easily. The black-haired man simply replied that it was all thanks to Almeria and the others, as it was through their efforts that they were able to reach the castle. The king was still deeply impressed that Roland could face the Demon King head-on, but Roland just replied that assassins like him were strong in one-on-one fights, and that it was nothing special. He didn't even use any special skills, because Roland believed that the ability to turn invisible and temporarily hide his body from all methods of detection was not unique to him. However, the king had received reports from Almeria and the others, stating that the group's combat abilities and strategies had improved significantly since Roland joined. They also admitted that they stood no chance against the Demon King alone, and said that without Roland, they would have never reached the Demon King's castle. However, Roland remained humble, making the king sigh at his insistence. The old king informed Roland that he could be granted the title of legendary assassin for defeating the Demon King, but Roland didn't want it. He wanted Almeria and the others to receive all the credit for defeating the Demon King, something the king had realized as soon as the mission was assigned. Roland believed that at least Almeria, as the first princess of the Furlan Kingdom, deserved the recognition, as she had truly lived up to her title as a genius, even though the king and her father didn't fully agree with that title. However, the king didn't want Roland to leave empty-handed, and offered to grant him any wish he desired. Roland already knew his wish, but it seemed like an impossible one. His silence led the king to speculate that Roland wanted Almeria for himself, which worried him, and made him try to persuade Roland not to marry her. But Roland quickly reassured the king that he had no intention of marrying his daughter. The mention of Almeria reminded Roland of how she had once told the group that she wished to one day live a normal life, which confused everyone. But Roland had decided that was exactly what he wanted for himself. He no longer wanted to live as an assassin. Instead, he wanted to live in peace, free from deception and lies. Roland just wanted a normal life, without worrying about being betrayed. A simple life was all he wished for, which surprised the king, King Randolph, because the request was so easy. King Randolph still insisted that Roland could wish to be surrounded by women, as having children was one of the things he was most proud of. But Roland told him to stop. The king asked if Roland needed anything else for his new life, but he just said there was nothing, and thanked Randolph. They shook hands before Roland left the room. As he stepped out, a cat was waiting for him, surprising the old king and making him wonder if the castle had stray cats. However, this was no ordinary cat. It walked down the hall, then stopped and scratched at its collar, catching Roland's attention. He knelt down and touched the pendant on the collar, causing it to glow unexpectedly. The cat flew into the air and transformed into a woman. It was Layla, the woman Roland had fought before. She let out a sigh of relief as the experience of being a cat wasn't pleasant, but she brushed it off and continued walking with Roland. Layla, the former Demon King, said she'd overheard Roland's wish and couldn't believe he had such a hard time deciding what he wanted, only to end up choosing such an ordinary wish. Layla's collar had two abilities: transformation and reducing the owner's magical power if it exceeded a safe threshold. After what Roland had done, the existence of a Demon King was no more. He replied with a smile, saying he remembered a certain Demon King who was defeated by some weird guy in less than 10 minutes. But Layla wasn't angry at Roland's words, because in her eyes that weird guy had become a dear man. She said the only reason he let her live was because he couldn't figure out how to use the collar, but she didn't mind if he treated her badly or even sold her off. Layla was grateful that he had removed the collar, calling him sweet, especially for an assassin. Roland chuckled and said he wasn't an assassin anymore, then walked out the door with her. Layla nestled against his arm. She asked where they were going now, and Roland replied that they would go wherever was considered normal. But that answer made Layla complain, saying it sounded boring. Roland warned her that she wouldn't find any more excitement from him. Just then, he took off his cloak, letting it fly into the dark night, as if he had become a new person. Roland recalled their first meeting when Layla had sworn to give everything she had to whoever could defeat her. She had also said he was a worthy companion, but Roland wasn't sure if that was sincere. He was human, so he couldn't fully understand the ways of demons. He asked Layla if she was okay, because her ears were bright red. She just responded with a small squeak and hid under the blanket in embarrassment. Suddenly, a knock on the door interrupted them. A voice called for Roland, and he remembered that he had chosen that name. He hurriedly got dressed. As the woman outside said she was there to collect this week's rent, Roland gave her the money and the girl thanked him. But she couldn't help but ask about the strange sounds coming from his room every day. At all hours, her question was cut off by a meow as a cat walked out of the room, catching her attention. Roland just said that she probably misheard a cat's meow. The girl blushed and apologized profusely, leaving Roland confused by her reaction. Before she corrected herself, saying she wanted to know his occupation, Roland suddenly realized that normal people usually have jobs. He thought that having a job would be helpful since the money he had was about to run out. Although he could ask King Randolph for more, that wasn't the normal life he was looking for. Roland decided to tell the girl he was looking for a job. She asked if he wanted to be an adventurer, but he wasn't interested, saying he didn't think he was healthy enough for that life. The girl agreed since his build seemed rather frail. After a moment of thought, she suggested he work as a staff member at the Adventurers Guild. When he arrived, a girl greeted him, and Roland told her he was there for the job opening, prompting the girl to call for the person in charge. A woman came out and told him to follow her to the back for the interview. Roland followed, telling himself to just do his best. The woman's name was Iris Nagaon, the branch manager of the guild. Roland introduced himself before sitting down to start the interview. However, every question Iris asked was met with a no from him, causing her to sigh and say in frustration that they couldn't just hire any random person. She hated how apathetic and monotonous he sounded, making Roland apologize and wonder how he could convince her he had experience without mentioning his previous job. Iris sighed and said that it didn't matter who he was or where he came from, as long as he was capable. She decided to proceed with the interview by assessing his abilities. Suddenly, things seemed to get easier for Roland as he asked her what she meant by capable. Iris replied that his abilities needed to include being proficient with a sword, having a basic understanding of magic, and possessing some knowledge and ability to appraise items. Even as she said this, Roland secretly flicked his hand toward the window, causing Iris to turn around with a confused look. As Roland proceeded to disappear and quickly approach Iris to remove her panties, and then sit back down without her noticing, Iris turned back and heard Roland say that he was certainly capable of doing what she asked. But she just laughed and told him not to be so cocky, as he also needed to be able to change clothes quickly. Roland held up her panties and asked if this would be sufficient, leaving her confused, until she realized they were hers, causing her to blush furiously. She held down her skirt and asked what kind of magic he had used, but Roland knew he had simply used his concealment skill to its maximum effect. This was the first time he had ever stolen someone's underwear, but Roland considered himself an expert at it. However, he still wondered if what he did was something that should happen during a normal interview. Iris was struggling to find her words, still flustered by what had just happened. Seeing this, Roland decided that perhaps she would feel more comfortable if he returned them to her. And so he did, activating his ability once more to put them back where they belonged. She realized this and grew even more embarrassed. When Roland asked if he was qualified for the job now, Iris grumbled that he had just passed the test. Roland wasn't going to take that for an answer, making Iris grit her teeth, before shouting that she wanted to hire him and they couldn't do it without him. Roland smiled, satisfied with that answer, and quickly left the building, looking up, knowing he would continue striving for the normal life he dreamed of. The next day, Roland got ready, putting on his clothes and glasses for the first job of his new, normal life. Layla, his cat, called out to him, asking what he was going out to do today. Roland replied that he was heading to his normal job. Lila was happy to see him looking so pleased with this job, but he reminded her to behave while he was gone. She promised there wouldn't be any trouble, all while maintaining her cat form. Roland quickly left the building and headed for the guild, where he was greeted by the girl from that afternoon, Melia MacGuffin. She was very impressed that he had passed the interview, especially since he was hired personally by Iris, rather than through the guild's other branches. That meant he was truly skilled at what he did. Melia didn't press the matter further, simply happy that she could finally be someone's handler. She told Roland that before he started, she would give him a tour of the facility. The black-haired man looked around and asked her what adventurers do, which surprised her as she didn't expect such a question. Melia explained that adventurers are tasked with fulfilling requests, from finding materials in deadly dungeons to searching for treasure in exchange for money. However, Roland just summarized it as adventurers being a bunch of rookies who do whatever they're told. The girl reminded him not to say such things inside a guild. Just then, they saw some adventurers returning, with the materials they had been asked to gather. She led Roland to a man named Morley. Morley asked if he had any experience as an adventurer, but Roland replied that he didn't, which made Morley mock him, saying he shouldn't get in the way of a C-rank adventurer like himself. Melia explained that C-rank adventurers make up 10% of all adventurers, meaning they're usually very strong. But Roland seemed disappointed by the arrogance of someone so powerful. Morley's job was to count all the herbs collected for requests that a group of adventurers had completed, and he believed there were enough of everything. However, Roland noticed that other types of herbs were mixed in with the emoji-so leaves needed for the quest. These words angered Morley, and he started screaming in Roland's face, saying that he was a master of botany, and demanded that Roland apologize. But Roland picked up 2 leaves, comparing one with black spots to one without. The leaves with black spots are called cereri and have no detoxification effect, making Morley realize that only half of the herbs qualified for the quest. He was about to hit Roland. He lunged at Roland. Roland simply sidestepped him quickly, causing Morley to tumble to the ground, embarrassing him as he bumped into the door. On his way out, Melia sighed in relief, impressed by Roland's knowledge. But he just said that failing a quest could lead to death. He said some other things that left the girl feeling flustered, until she burst out laughing, because she thought Roland was hilarious with his jokes. Roland just told himself that people here worked differently than what he was used to. The next day, Roland was assigned to clean a corner of the room, while Melia tried to help him. Morley told her she didn't need to help him since Iris would fire him sooner or later anyway. She hesitated to leave as Roland turned back to the mess, almost looking happy with this mundane task, when a voice called out, making Roland realize that Layla had followed him because she was bored. Roland tried to focus on his work until he overheard a few people talking about the ones who defeated the Demon King, and how because of them, the number of subjugation quests might decrease, making things difficult for the trade. Roland wondered if Almeria and the others were busy celebrating their victory at the Kingdom's parade. Layla asked him if he was really okay with that, but Roland insisted that he was fine, which made her call it a waste, because of his perseverance. After a while, Roland finished cleaning everything, impressing Melia with his work speed. She offered Roland a bite of her lunch. During their lunch break, someone appeared walking outside the back door, which caught Roland's attention, prompting him to go check it out. Roland immediately ran into a group of adventurers, furious that their materials hadn't been accepted earlier. He noticed Morley watching from a distance, but Roland didn't want to deal with him, and tried to walk away. This angered the main guy who tried to punch Roland. Roland knew that getting caught using violence against these guys would bring him trouble, which was exactly why Morley was watching from a nearby corner. So Roland decided to just cleverly take the punch, in a way that would break the man's fingers, without him having to do a thing. The man called for another to attack, but Roland didn't want to waste his time. Instead of having a proper lunch and getting back to his normal job, he used his stealth skill to knock out all the men in the area. When the last one, a girl, asked who he was, she knew he wasn't just some ordinary employee. But her train of thought was seemingly interrupted by Roland as he pushed her against the wall and began to charm her. Morley woke up, wondering what had happened, until he peeked around the corner. After hearing certain sounds, only to find Roland and the girl in a passionate act. Morley stared in horror and confusion as to why things had turned out this way. He felt even worse because that girl, Tanya, was someone he had feelings for. But now it was all for nothing. Roland returned from his vacation. Melia had told him that the new employee would work at the front desk first, before being assigned to a more suitable position. She gave Roland a guidebook for him to memorize. But it seemed he had already memorized it all within a few seconds. However, he wasn't going to tell her that. Melia would head to the front desk to assist people, while Roland would observe to learn. A man said he was looking for a quest, and Melia asked him for his identification papers. When he presented the papers, his actions seemed strange and panicked, which Roland noticed. The man went on to request every D-rank quest that needed to be completed within the day. Roland took a closer look at the papers and told Melia they were fake. He explained that there was transformation magic on it, and pointed out the man's strange behavior. The man started to lose his patience, until Melia tried to stand her ground and said he had fake papers. But he still tried to insist that the papers were real. Morley had said it would be fine if she just apologized. She did apologize, but that didn't help either. Roland decided to handle the matter himself, and tried using a fire spell on the papers. It had a barrier spell around it, but that only made the lie more obvious. Roland made the fire stronger, to successfully burn the documents, causing the man to cry out in frustration and admit that it had cost him a lot of money. He realized his mistake when Roland explained that all of his goods would be invalidated, while Roland secretly felt deeply disappointed by the amateurish job on the fake papers, since he himself would have had a smarter way of finding a home beforehand. He had chosen the identity of one of his victims because it was harder to detect when one had genuine papers. Roland told the man it was a good thing he was an adventurer and not an assassin, or else he would have been dead. But even though it sounded cool, everyone was just confused by his words. Melia remembered and said that they needed to contact the knights, at which point the man tried to escape. But Roland was faster and quickly incapacitated him, making it easy for the knights to capture him. Later that day, the girl was surprised by Roland's skills and thanked him, but he said it wasn't necessary, as he only wanted to make sure she wasn't hurt, making her heart race as she looked at him dreamily. Roland knew he needed to try harder to be normal. The next day, Morley tried to ask Melia out for a meal since it was her day off, but she regrettably said she already had plans, causing Morley to sigh in disappointment while Roland was doing his usual cleaning work. The girl came up to him and curiously asked where he lived. He said that he was staying at an inn, but Melia was surprised because normal people usually have a house near their workplace. This made Roland realize that he should have been living in a house all along to have a normal life. But he didn't know, because before, he had never needed to look for a long-term place to live. Roland didn't have a stable place to live before because of his job. Melia wondered if he had been eating properly since he moved here. But Layla just found her actions annoying. Melia found it strange to hear a woman's voice but see no one around. She quickly returned to the main topic, saying she could take Roland house hunting, since she was a local. Roland was a little confused, because he heard Melia tell Morley she was busy the next day. But Layla explained that Melia was just gently turning Morley down, which made Roland think that being a woman seemed tiring. The next day, Roland and Melia met in front of the guild hall. The girl tried to pet Layla, but the cat just ignored her, leaving Melia in shock. She quickly got back to the task of leading Roland to the first house, but Layla didn't seem to like that place. So they kept moving. After looking at many houses, they found one that had been vacant for a long time, owned by an adventurer. However, many people who had lived there before had suddenly disappeared. Although Melia was worried, Roland and Layla were satisfied with this house and prepared to check inside. However, the two of them sensed something strange and asked Melia to stay outside. They stepped inside and found a room with a gloomy atmosphere. Inside was a dark phantom. Layla told Roland to handle it calmly. He focused magic into his hand and punched it, destroying it in just a few seconds. A stone fell to the ground. As Melia came inside, looking worried after hearing a strange noise, Roland changed the subject and said he would take the house. Roland explained that he didn't have any luggage for Melia to help with, but she still wanted to be by his side, and insisted she would cook lunch, running off before he could react. Roland touched his collar, and Layla returned to her true form, saying they should do it. She became shy and said that Melia could come back at any moment. Roland replied that they should make sure to finish before that happened, and Layla leaned in for a kiss, only to realize it was a misunderstanding when Roland told her the places she could clean, while he would clean the rest. This made her push him away, in anger, and storm off, only to trip through the floorboards. Roland sighed. Most of the cleaning was done, and Melia returned with an impressed look on her face, setting down the lunch. Roland introduced Layla to her, but Melia was a bit scared because Layla was a demon. He reassured her that Layla couldn't use magic, which helped her calm down, until she noticed Layla was eating part of the lunch. The three of them ate lunch together, and Melia offered to help clean the rest of the house, which Roland agreed to despite Layla's complaints. The two women cleaned in the same room, where Melia saw Layla struggling, leading her to start teasing the demon woman, which annoyed Layla, who tried to summon one of her allies from the shadows. However, nothing happened, and Melia teased her even more. After all the commotion and cleaning, the house was finally finished and looked much cleaner. Melia decided to invite Roland over for dinner at her place. Since preparing a meal would be too much of a hassle, now Layla didn't want to go, but Roland didn't object to the idea. On the way there, Melia asked about the strange noise from earlier. Roland explained that it was a dark phantom he had defeated, which shocked Melia since it was a B-rank monster. She wondered just how strong Roland was, but he tried to insist that he was normal, though Melia didn't believe him. Eventually, they arrived at Melia's house, and Roland met her family, which made him feel very happy. Roland told Melia's father that life in the city was wonderful, even with all the adventures involved. The older man laughed and said that the life of a normal person was much different, finding a partner, building a family, and raising children. Roland took this to heart, as Melia's father wondered aloud if he received many offers from women, thanks to his nature and appearance. This made Roland smile as he remembered someone after leaving Melia's house and returning to his new home. Layla complained about him being late, but she was interrupted by a kiss from Roland, letting her know that this time they were really going to do it. The next day, Roland went to work and greeted Melia, who suggested he try working at the reception desk for the day. A man named Neil, according to his adventure ID, came to the counter and wanted to take on a D-rank quest, seemingly having avoided them for a long time. Roland looked at the rack and found a quest to exterminate a bird called a killer falcon. Roland wanted a second opinion and asked if this quest was too difficult for D-rank adventurers. Melia didn't see a problem with it, since all the previous D-rank adventurers had requested similar quests. Morley tried to chime in, saying they should just let the adventurers do whatever they want, but the two of them completely ignored him and continued their discussion. In the end, they decided to help the adventurer with his decision. Neil took the quest and left, but Roland felt he couldn't just leave things like that, so he asked Melia to watch the counter for a bit while he went out. Iris saw him leaving and asked where he was going. Roland explained that he was checking on the adventurer who had just taken the quest he was in charge of, but Iris reminded him that she'd heard many rumors about him around the guild, and that she had also just learned about his past. Roland wasn't too concerned about this, as he just wanted to be a normal employee, and started to walk away. But before leaving, he decided to tease the girl by asking if she had checked her underwear today, leaving her flustered and angry. While walking through the city, Roland remembered that Layla had said his glasses change his appearance and aura, so he put them in his pocket and headed to a location in the forest, where Nil might be. Sure enough, Nil was trying to shoot arrows at a large bird, but it easily dodged every arrow and tried to attack him. Roland noticed the situation was very dangerous due to Nil's mistakes, so he decided to approach the archer and started giving him some tips, such as the killer falcon's weak points. The bird's main weakness is when it's targeting its prey, and not just any prey, but something that's moving like a person. The killer falcon is targeting Nil, and Roland suggests that Neil should let the bird charge at him, creating an opportunity for him. Since there was no other way, Roland said that if Neil didn't have the guts to take down a creature like that at his level, he should just give up on being an archer. Neil slapped his own face to fire himself up and said he would try the idea, standing still and waiting for the bird to dive. Despite his fear, Nil remained focused and shot at the charging bird, while Roland smiled and turned away. He returned to the guild with the glasses on his face, seeing Melia's eyes welling up with tears because she was so worried about him. Iris had told her that Roland went into the restroom and didn't come out for a whole hour. Roland reassured her that everything was fine, but Morley tried to butt in to get Melia's attention, and tried to prove he was superior to both of them. But they just ignored him and went back to their work. Roland continued to help adventurers with processing their quests, and it was almost time to get off work when he saw a familiar face walk in, carrying the feathers of a killer falcon, which meant he had completed the quest. Roland praised Neil, and the archer said he realized he still had a lot to learn. He whispered his thanks to Roland for what he had done. But Roland was confused and asked what Neil was thanking him for. Neil just smiled and left the guild. Roland realized that perhaps he should change his hairstyle next time. A new day, a new chance to make a good impression at work. During lunch break, Melia was eating with some other female colleagues when the people at the counter started chatting. One asked Melia about the new guy, and she knew they were talking about Roland. I heard some adventurers have even requested Roland to be in charge of their quests. Another girl at the table said she heard Roland had defeated a grizzly bear and saved another adventurer, which startled the others since a grizzly bear is equivalent to an A-rank monster. Melia quickly confirmed that it was true. The other girls wondered why Melia was there, and she explained that she had arranged the original quest herself. It was just a request to collect some Kuen flower pistols, considered an E-rank quest. However, a lot of time had passed since the quest was assigned, and the guild hadn't received any word from the adventurer. That's why Roland and Melia decided to go out and search for them. The other girls didn't understand why they would send Roland, a newcomer. Melia explained that it was a direct order from the branch manager, Iris, which suggested Roland was no ordinary employee. She also revealed that Roland had brought his cat with him, which made the other girls excitedly gossip about the adorable cat and how it had eaten lots of the cookies Melia made. Although the cat still paid no attention to Melia. As Roland and Melia walked through the forest, Melia became frantic when she couldn't find their location on the map. But Roland seemed to know the way, having memorized every detail of the quest. Even though he'd never been to this area before, he led Melia to their destination without getting lost. However, he claimed he would forget everything by the next morning. Suddenly, Melia mentioned that Roland could throw his voice, but she had no idea he was actually just talking with Layla. When asked about the grizzly bear, Melia revealed that she had been assigned to wait at the entrance, and it only took about half an hour for Roland to return. The other girls were once again amazed that Roland had completed a monster subjugation quest in such a short amount of time. Melia pointed out that it seemed the grizzly had found its cub, and everything was resolved. Before any subjugation took place, a voice echoed throughout the guild building. Melia immediately looked up in recognition, then stepped out into the hallway to see who was calling. She confirmed that there were workers on duty, but explained that they were still on their lunch break. That's when she recognized the tiny boy, the very one Roland had saved before. The boy came to ask for Roland, but Melia told him Roland was out for lunch. However, just as they were talking, the very Roland they were discussing walked in. The boy was overjoyed to see him, thanking Roland for what he did in the cave the other day. Roland patted the boy's head and reminded him to be more careful next time. This scene made the 3 female employees, including Melia, watch with eyes full of admiration and awe. Roland waved goodbye to the boy, surprised to have received thanks even though he hadn't actually defeated anyone. Roland continued with his usual work, and often met with people who came to ask for his help or to entrust him with tasks. Ever since Layla first followed him there, she would always rest under a table to be close to him and watch everything he did. Every day, she saw him acting as an errand boy for everyone as usual, and asked if he found it boring. But Roland replied that it was part of a normal job, which made her sigh irritably as she was starting to get sick of that phrase. Suddenly, Roland heard Melia's voice talking about how something was about to get complicated. He noticed she was talking with 3 other adventurers, then walked over to a nearby shelf with a tired look on her face. She muttered that there was still one person missing, and that she was trying to find something. When Roland got her attention and asked what was wrong, she explained that a party still hadn't gathered enough members for a C-rank subjugation quest. Melia recalled that the area was actually near the village where Roland used to live, and that it seemed more monsters had been appearing there lately. Roland looked closely at the papers as Melia continued to explain that the request might be too dangerous to do alone, which was why it was marked with a party requirement. However, the ones who wanted to take the quest still needed one more person to meet the minimum requirement, and that day was the last day of the recruitment period. Otherwise, the guild branch would have to hand over the recruitment to other branches. Melia beamed at Roland's ability to remember small details, but suddenly a man called out Roland's name. It was Neil, the archer he had helped before. Neil happily called Roland bro and excitedly asked if he could join them on the trip. Roland felt conflicted and hesitant, while Melia agreed that it would be safer for Roland to go with them. However, Roland wasn't sure if an employee could accompany a party on a quest. Melia hesitated for a moment, then suddenly had an idea. She told them both to give her a moment to ask the branch manager, and immediately ran off before Roland had a chance to object. Neil thanked Melia, and right after that, Iris entered the room saying there was no problem with Neil joining, but Roland remained silent, which made Iris tease him, asking if he wasn't confident. He replied that wasn't it, but Iris already knew better, because she knew Roland was capable of defeating a legendary demon all by himself. That same legendary demon was currently yawning under the table. Iris told Roland not to let his staff status stop him from joining missions, and that she had complete faith in his abilities. This surprised everyone in the room, and they couldn't believe it because the branch manager seemed to place immense trust in him. Everyone had so many questions with no answers, but that didn't matter because Roland decided to accept the offer, as it was a direct order from Iris. Melia watched the exchange with a look of frustration and jealousy, thinking that the close relationship between Roland and Iris was a bit suspicious. The group stepped outside and Roland introduced himself. But the other 2 adventurers, not Neil, looked at Roland with contempt and showed their disappointment. They told him not to get in their way. Suddenly, Neil cheerfully told Roland that he was honored to fight alongside him, but Roland told Neil to stop calling him Big Brother, which made Neil decide to call him Master instead, but Roland didn't want to be called that either. Finally, they started moving towards their destination, while Neil and the others began chatting about their past achievements. Roland realized that this group was only temporary for this one mission. He asked them about their ranks and learned that the spear user and Hilo were both C rank, while Neil was D rank. The spear wielder asked Roland what he had ever accomplished, and Roland simply replied that it was all just ordinary stuff, which made the man scoff and move on. After a while, they were approaching the village. Roland said they needed to hurry, confusing the others and angering the healer, as he considered himself the leader of the group. Roland explained that there was smoke rising from the direction of the village, but the others assumed it was just the villagers burning firewood. However, a sudden roar echoed out as a wolf-like creature charged towards them. Roland recognized it and told everyone to stay calm, but inwardly wondered if he should just end it quickly. Before telling himself that wasn't something a normal staff member should do, Roland began to explain that the creature was called a red wolf, with high agility and powerful attacks. The healer believed the best strategy was to let the frontliners approach first, to give the archer an opening to shoot. Unfortunately, the spear wielder didn't want to get anywhere near the wolf, and started to run away as the wolf charged at them. But Roland quickly pulled him back, and smacked him on the back of the neck, saying he'd get himself killed if he kept that up. Roland told him to lower his spear and keep his hips low while maintaining eye contact with the wolf. After a moment of hesitation, the spear wielder finally listened and held his ground. Although his body was trembling with fear, the sight of the spear made the red wolf stop its attack and begin to circle him, remaining wary. Roland called out to Neil to shoot a few arrows at it, blinding it in one eye and incapacitating it. The guy on the front line was told to charge and stab the wolf in the jaw. Finally, the monster was dead, and the spearman fell to the ground in tears, before looking up at Roland and thanking him profusely for what he had done. Both Nil and this guy started calling Roland Big Brother. The healer was still a bit dazed from what had happened, and Roland noticed this, so he went over and asked if he could offer advice when needed, and the spearman immediately agreed. This time they continued their journey, while Roland wondered why a red wolf was here, since its natural habitat was much farther south. But his thoughts were quickly pushed aside when they finally reached the burning village. They rushed into the burning village and started helping to put out the fire as quickly as they could. Roland was throwing a bucket of water on a nearby fire when he heard a voice call out to him. It was the spearman, also holding 2 buckets of water, who told Roland that the fire was caused by a lizard-like monster. Roland knew that a fire caused by a lizard meant the monster was likely a salamander, and he believed the current group wouldn't be able to handle such a creature, so he told them to keep helping the others and put out the flames, while he would handle the monster himself. He started to walk away, leaving the buckets he was holding, before heading towards the forest, and followed the tracks on the ground that led to a specific area. After a while, Roland finally caught up to the salamander, which was startled by the appearance of another person. Turned its head until it saw Roland. It opened its mouth and took a light breath, as a spark formed in its mouth before it unleashed a massive pillar of fire. But Roland simply stood his ground, and sliced right through it with a single swing, the flames instantly vanishing in seconds. The salamander was confused, not understanding why its attack had no effect, so it tried to use its fire breath once more, but it was still unsuccessful. It began to scream in frustration and anger that Roland was still alive, while he explained that all he needed to do to counter the flames was to move at a fast enough speed. As the lizard charged at Roland to attack, he told it that it would be punished for what it did to the village, then proceeded to slice off the salamander's arm, stab the monster in the throat, and slam it to the ground. Roland apologized for fighting like that, and began to drag the salamander's bloody corpse in one direction, while a stranger watched from a distance in silence. This unknown man started to sweat as he saw Roland and wondered who he was. To be able to extinguish a salamander's flame with one hand and kill it in the blink of an eye. The stranger tried to come up with theories about Roland's identity, thinking he might be from the other side, but also wondered why Roland hadn't faced the red wolf directly earlier. Suddenly, Roland looked in the stranger's direction, startling the man, who tried to hide, thinking he'd been spotted. Roland continued to drag the corpse, calming himself down a bit as an idea had sparked in his mind, and he'd decided on something for later. Smoke still lingered around the village, but most of the flames had been extinguished with the help of the villagers and 4 men who were dousing it with water. Roland brought the dead salamander's corpse to the village, and the horrified village chief asked if Roland was the one who had killed it. He introduced himself and said he was part of the group that had come here on a mission. The village chief also introduced himself, and thanked Roland and the others for their help. However, he was about to mention the other monster, the red wolf, when the group told him they had already killed it on their way here. Roland told the village chief that they could now rest easy, and the villagers wanted them to stay the night, while they prepared a feast to thank them for what they had done. Roland walked around the area and looked at the dead bodies, which all seemed to have been killed by the red wolf. As the village chief explained how they lived in constant fear with monsters lurking around, Roland said that the red wolf was a highly intelligent monster. The chief recalled other monsters that had appeared in the village in the past, like orcs, which caused many people to leave. He sighed in frustration about why things had to be this way, when all they wanted was to live a normal life. This made Roland wonder how much suffering he himself had to go through to have such a life. With a determined look on his face, Roland told the village chief not to worry, and assured him that no more monsters would attack the village. As night fell, everyone gathered around the fire, eating and drinking happily together, creating a cozy scene. Roland couldn't help but be moved, remembering the other people he had met so far, like Melia and her family. But he had more to do tonight. Neil and the others could be seen drinking and chatting about the achievements they had accomplished. That day, all thanks to Roland, but when they turned to check on him, he was gone, leaving them confused. Far away in the forest, Roland returned to the spot where he had fought the salamander and called out to the person he had noticed earlier. The man stepped out with a smile, chuckling about how Roland looked so ordinary, yet had the strength and ability to fight the salamander and the red wolf like it was nothing. He introduced himself as an A-rank adventurer and a monster tamer who was looking for strong companions. He explained that he had been using his monsters to attack villages, to lure in adventurers to scout. However, Roland looked displeased hearing this smug man's plans. Roland told the man that he had robbed them of what they had worked so hard for today, but the stranger insisted that the villagers only died because they were too weak. The man started laughing at Roland's words, calling him a nuisance and saying he didn't need him anymore, pulling out a knife and declaring that he could still fight without his monsters. But Roland looked at him with cold eyes and said that he talked too much for a man who was about to die. In just a few seconds, blood poured from the man's mouth. As he fell to the ground, apparently dead, Roland quickly left, seemingly not noticing the strange wolf-like creatures that were approaching the corpse. The next day, everyone said their goodbyes to the four men as they departed. While Roland wondered how Layla was doing, but his thoughts were cut short when Neil confessed that he had been following Roland the day before, but insisted that he hadn't seen or heard anything. He then asked if Roland would take him on as a disciple. Roland immediately refused, much to Neil's surprise. He tried to state his reasons and desires, but Roland just said that all he could teach were the basics. Even so, Neil didn't care. And in the end, Roland didn't exactly say no, but he didn't really agree either and just told Neil to hurry up as they continued on their way. Eventually, they made it back to the guild, where Amelia was excited to see Roland, but was also shocked to hear what the group had been through. She marked the quest as complete and paid everyone, giving Roland a bonus and a day off. However, he was surprised to hear what he'd received, as he had just thought the quest was a simple errand, causing everyone to cry out in surprise. Melia also mentioned that the director wanted to speak with Roland. Upon meeting Iris, Roland told her about the man he met who could tame monsters, and how he had vanished, but Iris said there was nothing they could do. Iris changed the subject, telling Roland she would treat him to dinner at a fancy restaurant as a thank you for his work. But he said he had other things to do, like taking care of a cute cat, and then quickly left, leaving Iris feeling utterly defeated at having lost to a cat. Returning home, Roland was greeted by a disgruntled Layla, who had apparently had a terrible day after being chased by Melia and forced to eat cat food. Roland explained that he had tried to cheer her up by buying the steak and wine she had asked for, but it seemed that wasn't enough, as Layla wanted to know more about what had happened at the village that she didn't already know. Roland didn't hesitate to confess that it was the first time he had killed someone of his own free will, and that he would try to avoid it in the future. Layla realized that Roland's mindset had started to change. Ever since he began his normal life, she placed her hand on his cheek, saying that only a demon king could understand another demon king, and that she seemed to be the only one who could understand him. Roland pulled Layla into a hug, confessing that he felt strange and warm whenever he was with her. She blushed, and admitted she felt the same way, hiding her face in embarrassment. Noticing her ears had turned red, Roland asked if she was okay, but she just sulkily told him to figure it out for himself. While walking through the city with a bag of groceries in hand, Roland passed by an alley. He was about to keep walking but felt that something was off. So he turned back to look inside. Inside, he saw a small, filthy girl covered in bruises and dressed in rags, her head bowed with a gloomy expression. He stood there for a second, before kneeling down to greet the little girl, who weakly lifted her head to look at him, revealing a slave mark on her neck. Seeing the mark, Roland's heart ached. He took a potato from his bag and offered it to the little girl. She weakly reached for the potato and took a bite, and after finishing it, she leaned back against the wall. Roland knew the little girl wouldn't survive without his help, so he decided to take her home. When he got home, Layla greeted him in her apron, happily announcing that today's sauce was the best she'd ever made. She looked into his grocery bag to check if he'd forgotten the bread, since she needed it for dinner. It was then that Layla finally noticed the little girl on Roland's back. and asked him about her. As Roland came inside, he explained that he'd be taking care of the girl for a while. Layla wondered why he would even bother since no one asked him to. Roland said it was no problem, as they had a spare room. Layla agreed, telling him to do as he pleased, and announced that the bath was ready, though she couldn't help him since she was busy preparing dinner. After her bath, the little girl had fallen fast asleep, probably because she felt comfortable. Roland asked Layla if there was a way to remove the slave mark. Layla said there was, but she couldn't do anything about it since she could no longer use magic. Noticing Roland staring intently at the little girl, Layla teased him about his kindness despite him being a former assassin. Getting back on topic, Layla explained that a slave mark is a contract that can only be removed by the one who placed it. Roland already knew this and said that was only true according to human knowledge. Layla looked closely at the little girl and wondered why someone would make her a slave since she didn't look valuable enough to sell. Roland agreed, as Layla explained that humans often use different kinds of slave contracts. She mentioned the little girl's contract, called a demon contract, which trades one's soul for extraordinary magical power. However, it comes with the trade-off of submission and the inability to lie. Layla said she could teach Roland how to cast the spell, but if he didn't learn it properly, it wouldn't work, and there was a chance of failure. Even so, Roland was determined to learn it. Layla got a little smug, saying he should be grateful that a demon like her was teaching him personally, but Roland quickly put her in her place and told her to get on with it. After some time teaching, Roland felt he had a chance to break the seal. He approached the little girl, but before Layla could remind him of something important, Roland gently cast the spell, succeeding on his first try and breaking the slave mark. The slave mark on the little girl's neck vanished in an instant. Layla stood there, stunned that Roland had succeeded in casting a 5th-rank spell in a single try without a magic circle, making his magical power equivalent to hers. Roland wondered about 5th-rank magic, and Layla explained that there's a ranking system for demons with higher ranks possessing greater magical power. She also revealed that she is a 1st-rank demon, and asserted that Roland has a talent for magic. Although he felt he hadn't done anything special, Roland remained humble. But Layla wanted him to understand that his magic was on par with other demons. When dinner time came, the little girl finally woke up and was startled to see Roland in the room. He introduced himself and gave her a bowl of soup that Layla had made, saying he couldn't guarantee how it tasted, but it was better than nothing. Layla walked in with an angry look on her face, offended by what he'd said. The little girl started eating the soup, but still didn't say a word, which made Roland think. He leaned closer to Layla, which made her mistakenly think he was about to show affection to her in front of the young girl, causing her to blush, though she didn't resist. In reality, it was just a misunderstanding, as Roland placed a hand on her neck and turned her into a cat. Layla cried out in confusion and anger, but the little girl was delighted by the sight. Roland picked up the cat and told the little girl to take care of it, while the cat loudly complained about the situation and demanded Roland turn her back into a human. The little girl asked if taking care of the cat was an order from her master, but Roland insisted that he wasn't her master and wasn't forcing her. He told them both that he was heading to work, and if she needed anything, she could ask the cat. Roland went to the guild for work and looked through the member list, realizing that the race, gender, and age of all the adventurers weren't registered. Melia noticed and asked him what he was doing, and he explained that he just wanted to confirm something, but a meow from outside distracted them. Roland opened the window and asked the little girl what she was doing there before letting her into the guild. Everyone stared and whispered about how reliable Roland was for taking care of the little girl. He apologized for the girl showing up, but Melia said it was fine and that they could just get permission from the branch manager. However, Morley walked in and said that wasn't going to happen because this place wasn't a daycare. Roland thought that made sense. Morley started complaining about how much he hated kids because they were noisy and annoying. Just then, Iris entered the room, having heard the commotion and learned about the situation. She immediately gave Roland permission to keep the girl with him, as long as she didn't cause any trouble. Flustered and annoyed, Morley asked Iris if it was really okay to give Roland so much freedom, trying to complain that he was always the first one to go home and didn't take his job seriously. Iris replied that it was only because he always finished his work, which earned him the right to leave early. So Iris just told Roland to keep the little girl in the reception office, and he told the girl to be good, saying he would come back to check on her often. The little girl beamed as Roland patted her head. When work was over, the little girl was brought back to Roland and Layla's house. They had named her Meili, an ancient demon word meaning blue sky, because she couldn't remember her own name. The little girl seemed very happy with the name and jumped for joy as Layla asked Roland what he planned to do with her. Roland replied that he would turn her into an adventurer and also wanted to find someone to teach her how to live a normal life. Layla was about to make a suggestion when Roland thought to himself that he could ask Melia for help, which made Layla storm off in anger. Later, Roland would tell Melia about the training sessions they would have every day until morning. But the first session was just running. The little girl seemed to have trouble with this. She would get tired quickly, but over time, Melia would learn to build her stamina and get used to it. Roland asked the little girl if she remembered her time as a slave, but Melia still didn't remember a single thing about her past. Layla called them in for dinner. However, she wasn't happy at all. She stared at Roland and said that she wasn't his maid. He reassured her that he had never thought of her that way. Layla admitted that she just wanted more of Roland's attention, since he seemed to be focused only on the little girl. Roland didn't understand what she meant and asked if she wanted him to train her, which made her groan. Night came and everyone seemed to be fast asleep. With only Roland awake, he quickly noticed a strange presence outside the house, so he went out to check. He was confused about who the assassin's target was, since very few people knew Layla's identity. This could only mean one thing. The assassin was there for the little girl. As time went by, Roland continued to train Melia. The little girl held a tree branch and tried to attack the black-haired man, but Roland easily dodged every blow. Even though none of her attacks landed, he still praised her and said she was doing great. She just needed to gain more practical experience. Melia asked if the moves had names, and Roland said they didn't need any, but she could name them herself if she wanted. Layla announced that it was time for lunch, giving Melia an opportunity to attack, as she shouted out one of her moves. But the very fact that she yelled made it easy for Roland to block her attack, causing the little girl to pout and throw the branch away in frustration. She ran to Layla for comfort, but Layla sided with Roland, saying that this wasn't a game, and that Roland wouldn't lose to some kid, which made Melia even angrier. A few days had passed since the assassin incident, and things had been quiet. But Roland didn't think it would end that simply. During a meal, Layla asked Roland why he was teaching Melia assassination techniques instead of swordsmanship or martial arts. If he wanted her to become an adventurer, Roland admitted that he didn't want her to have the naive mindset of many other adventurers who think they can afford to fail because there will always be a next time. Layla praised the little girl for improving so much, compared to the last time she saw her train, and Melia said it was all thanks to Roland's help and advice. Layla pondered and asked if the little girl was finally ready to become an adventurer. Roland asked Melia if she wanted to become an adventurer, and the little girl answered immediately without any hesitation. They arrived at the guild hall, and Melia, seeing them, wondered why he was there on his day off. Roland explained that he was there to register Melia as an adventurer, even though she was still young. Melia went to get the application form for the little girl to fill out before explaining that the test would consist of a magical power measurement and a practical exam. The practical exam would come first, and unfortunately, it was being supervised by Morley, much to everyone's disappointment for various reasons. It wasn't that they thought Melia would lose, but just that she had to deal with Morley. They walked over to the combat area, where Morley confidently declared that his job was to teach children to give up on their foolish dreams. But everyone was already prepared to laugh at him. Roland handed Melia a sheathed knife and told her to do just as they had practiced. Melia and Morley stood facing each other, preparing for the match. Melia started the test, and Morley immediately rushed forward, unleashing a powerful strike with his wooden sword. Morley declared that the first to strike wins, but Melia easily dodged it and repeatedly struck Morley on the back multiple times. Eventually, Morley had to beg her to stop, which meant she had passed the combat test, although she still had room to grow, especially with her magic. Being so young, she still passed the adventure exam with flying colors. The three of them decided to have a party to celebrate. Back home, Layla helped Melia get dressed up, and the act seemed to make Melia remember something, but she decided to put it aside for now. Melia ran into the guild, eagerly asking Roland to give her a quest, but he had to explain that F-rank adventurers don't get combat quests, so she could only take on easier jobs. Suddenly, night stormed in, demanding to take her away, but Layla and Roland refused. The knights decided to use force, and Roland sighed before knocking one of them out with a punch straight to the face, sending him crashing to the ground, which made everyone in the guild look at him with complete admiration. Unexpectedly, Baladel, the leader of the knights, walked in and demanded the girl, calling her by a nickname. Layla refused, and Baladel took notice of her beauty, trying to invite Layla to come with him. But she slapped him right across the face. Layla declared that only Roland had the right to touch her. Baladel didn't recognize Roland until he took off his glasses. Roland asked about the situation with Baladel's older brother, saying that if the man returned, Roland would forgive him and wouldn't reveal the dirty tricks he used to seize the throne. Baladel suddenly became cooperative, apologizing for what he and his knights had done. Roland accepted this with satisfaction, but still wanted the old man to reveal everything he knew about the little girl, after learning about her past. In the end, Roland allowed Baladel to leave, since it wasn't normal to interrogate the nobility. He said goodbye to Baladel. That evening, Roland returned to the guild, with everyone's eyes fixed on him, wondering who he was to make a lord kneel. Roland told Mei Li that everything would be okay, which made her remember something else, but she quickly dismissed it. She said she would take the quest he had chosen. When night came, once Mei Li was asleep, Roland quickly told Layla that Mei Li was actually a princess from the fallen kingdom of Badenhark, and seemed to have lost her memory. Layla wasn't happy to hear this, and Roland opened his arms to hug her. Layla asked if anyone was waiting for Mei Li, but Roland didn't know either, and said he might have to leave later to ask King Randolph about it. Mei Li lay in bed, wondering when her memories had returned, recalling all the moments she had interacted with Roland, Layla, and many other things after being enslaved. She remembered a large mansion that was once her home, where she had kind parents and 3 siblings. However, something happened and it was all taken away from her. After that, Mei Li didn't understand anything else. Everything went dark until she met Roland in the alley. Back in the present, Mei Li got out of bed and went to Roland and Layla's bedroom, asking if she could sleep there tonight. Mei Li got into bed and hugged Roland tightly until Layla poked her head out from under the covers with an annoyed look, because Mei Li's arrival had ruined her plans with Roland. Now she wouldn't have another chance before he left for a while. Mei Li noticed that Layla hadn't gotten dressed yet. She asked if Layla felt cold, and Layla said she was fine because she was under the blanket, and told the little girl to get in between them so Roland would have a place to sleep. The little girl asked Roland where he was going, and he said he would be on a business trip for 2 days, and that Mei Li would be staying with Layla. Hearing this, the sad little girl clung to Roland. Layla joined in, hugging them both, and they fell asleep in a warm embrace. The next morning, Mei Li told Layla she was going to the Adventurers Guild and would be back when she was finished. Layla continued with her housework and wondered what Roland was up to. In fact, Roland was in King Randolph's bedchamber at that very moment, trying to wake the king up by gently tapping him. This caused the king to jolt awake, startled. But Roland reassured him that there was no danger. Then, Roland explained that he had a favor to ask regarding the princess of the Badenhark kingdom. Roland wanted to know if there were any survivors from that kingdom, and King Randolph revealed that Mei Li's mother was still alive, but there was no official information about the rest of her family. With this information, Roland asked the king to inform Mei Li's mother of the situation, then quickly returned home. When Roland got home, Mei Li still hadn't returned from the Adventurers Guild. Layla told Roland how everyone was talking about the little girl. Many people had commented on Mei Li, saying she was a promising new adventurer. The conversation was cut short when Roland announced that Mei Li's mother was alive and would be coming for her in 2 days, which made Layla look away with a sad smile. Roland noticed the change and watched her in silence, while Layla tried to sound optimistic, saying she couldn't be sad that Mei Li would be reunited with her family. They were determined to make the next 2 days the best days Mei Li had ever had, creating plenty of memories before the day of their parting arrived. Layla helped Mei Li get ready, and when the carriage arrived, the 3 of them held hands as they went out to meet Mei Li's mother, or rather Alias's mother. All the memories came flooding back to the little girl, as mother and daughter embraced in tears. Mei Li's mother thanked Roland and Layla for taking care of her, promising that she would forever be in their debt. She reminded her daughter to take a moment to say goodbye to them, and Mei Li stepped forward to tell Roland and Layla that she was so happy to have met them and had learned so much from them. Layla comforted Mei Li, telling her this wasn't a final goodbye. The little girl promised she would always come back to visit them and would write them a letter, but she also reminded him that one day she would become Roland's wife. Roland simply replied that he understood, which left Layla feeling flustered and jealous of his response. The little girl gave one last tearful smile, saying she was very happy to have met them. Before leaving with her mother, Roland and Layla felt the same way. After that, Roland went to see King Randolph again, and just like before, he slapped him across the face to wake him up. The king shot up with a yelp, his eyes wide as he stared at the black-haired man, wondering why Roland was still visiting and if he was actually planning to kill him. Roland quickly corrected his assumption, saying he'd come to thank Randolph for the other day and to repay his debt. The king tried to refuse, saying it wasn't necessary since Roland had already helped him so much back when he was an assassin. But Roland insisted on repaying the debt, saying it had nothing to do with his past. He owed the king a favor as an ordinary man. Randolph thought for a moment, then suddenly had an idea for how Roland could make it up to him. One that involved his daughter, the first princess and a hero in her own right, Almeria. Roland wondered if something was wrong with her. And there was, because after defeating and conquering the Demon King, she'd been feeling down. Her personal slave had asked what was the matter. She realized Almeria was sad because the person she loved had suddenly disappeared, even though they had promised to be together after the conquest. Roland nodded, seeming to understand the situation, and asked if he just needed to find that person. But Randolph was annoyed by Roland's denseness, telling him that Almeria was talking about him, and told him to go cheer her up. Roland returned to the city, wondering what to do, because despite what he'd been told, he knew he hadn't made any promises to Almeria. Besides, dating royalty wasn't something an ordinary person did. When he got home, he explained the whole situation to Layla, who remembered Almeria, and called Roland a troublemaker for the situations he got himself into. But Roland didn't remember promising the girl anything, despite what had apparently happened from Almeria's perspective. It seemed Roland had just vanished, and she'd been sad about it ever since. Layla seemed to come up with an idea to solve this and suggested that Roland could make Almeria think he was dead. Because if it's sadness for someone who has passed away, time will heal that wound, rather than the endless suffering over someone who's just missing. Roland's eyes widened, thinking it was a brilliant idea. He asked Layla if she had a plan, and she told him about a level 7 illusion magic called Real Nightmare. Roland's curiosity was piqued as he stood up from his chair. She asked if he wanted to learn it, and he immediately said yes, while Layla began teaching him the spell. As expected, Roland learned it incredibly fast, which made Layla a little unhappy, as it hurt her pride as a demon lord. While she was distracted, Roland raised his hand and held it near Layla's face, testing out the Real Nightmare spell, making her believe she was a dog and he was her master. Suddenly, Layla became a completely different person, pouncing at Roland, barking happily as she tried to tackle him. But he quickly dodged, which only made her annoyed and pouty. He realized it wasn't just an illusion, but was combined with hypnosis. But Roland's thoughts were cut short, as Layla started kissing and licking his face like a dog while barking. Roland figured it was probably time to bring her back to reality. With a simple clap of his hands, he snapped her out of the trance and she realized what she'd been doing, her face flushing red as she started complaining about what he'd done to her. Roland turned to head to the palace again, saying there was no time for idle chatter, which only made Layla feel offended, as she thought he was dismissing her words as not worth listening to. But Roland just kissed her to shut down that annoyance, then told her he'd reward her if she behaved while he was gone. She replied not to take too long before he left the house. It was another normal day at Roland's job, with many adventurers flooding the guild, requesting quests and creating a lot of work for the staff. Layla was there in her cat form, batting at papers, while Melia approached Roland and handed him some documents to handle. He took them without hesitation, starting to go over the papers. The girl leaned in closer to get a better look at Roland. Before remarking that he'd seemed a bit off lately, she asked if it was because Meili had gone home, which made both Roland's and Layla's eyes widen in shock. He thought for a long time and didn't know how to explain it, only saying that there was a strange feeling, like an empty space in his heart. Melia said that feeling was called loneliness. The girl smiled and told Roland it was cute that he cared about his relatives, then told him to get back to his paperwork. However, as she started to turn away, someone suddenly burst through the guild's doors, leaving Melia confused and wondering who it could be. The doors were thrown open with a bang, and a person confidently strode into the building. Roland's head snapped around and his eyes widened, as he saw a familiar face standing in the middle of the guild, wearing a look of determination and satisfaction. Almeria, dressed in her familiar armor, apologized for the commotion, while everyone in the building was surprised and excited to see the hero princess in their hall. Melia, on the other hand, was just confused about her identity, thinking she was just another adventurer. Almeria approached the reception desk and told Melia she was at the guild because she'd heard an employee named Roland worked there. But Melia was struggling to answer her, while Roland himself was hiding his face with papers, trying not to be seen. Unfortunately, Almeria moved closer to get a better look and recognized Roland, even though he tried to claim she had the wrong person. But she easily saw through his disguise, which was just a pair of glasses. Roland was silent for a moment, still holding the paper over his mouth, before asking Almeria what she wanted. She replied that she came to become an adventurer. He immediately told her they weren't accepting any more applications, leaving Almeria confused and annoyed, as she thought everyone should have a chance to become an adventurer. She turned to Melia for help, which only made the poor girl even more bewildered. Meanwhile, Roland wondered why Almeria was at the guild, thinking that perhaps the spell had failed. When Roland had gone to the palace, Almeria was crying on her bed, her face buried in her pillows and blankets, sobbing. She heard a sound and turned, asking who was there. Until she saw Roland walking through the sheer curtains of her bedroom window. Her tears stopped for a moment as she stared in confusion and shock, recognizing him. As the black-haired young man approached, he used the real nightmare spell on her. He told her that he had died after the battle with the Demon King, bleeding out from a wound on the way back. Roland took a step back to see the spell's effect, and saw the girl start to cry again, confused, not knowing if she was speaking to him or to herself. Almeria said that she loved him and that he had promised to stay by her side, to kiss her after the battle was over, repeating over and over that he had promised her. Roland seemed to recall that he had promised something like that, and deciding to keep his promise, he stepped forward and gave Almeria a sweet, brief kiss, before he quickly left, praying for her well-being. And yet, it seemed that wasn't the last time he would see her. Roland wondered if someone had removed the spell and frowned at the situation, while Almeria pleaded with Melia to hurry up and give her an application to become an adventurer. But Roland refused, telling her she was already a princess and a hero, and that this was no time to be playing around. The girl pouted and said it didn't matter, questioning his attitude after what he'd done to her. All the other staff members were confused, whispering among themselves about Almeria and Roland's relationship, wondering who Roland really was. Almeria's expression turned cheerful, wondering if Roland was embarrassed, but Roland tried to insist he didn't know what she was talking about, and asked if she had told her father about this visit. This only made the girl more annoyed, as she didn't want to bring her father into this. Everyone in the guild started to wonder if the two of them were actually together. Almeria muttered a complaint that she should be allowed to become an adventurer, also wondering why Roland was wearing glasses. Then she became shy, saying that the glasses looked really good on him. She demanded that he ask his superior to make her an adventurer, but he refused. However, another staff member came over and said it would probably be best to listen to her, otherwise their heads might be in trouble. With some hesitation, Roland agreed and went with Almeria to see the branch manager, Iris. Almeria confidently told the woman that she wanted to become an adventurer and asked if that would be possible. Iris said that would be fine and was about to say something else when Almeria cut her off. The girl asked for Iris's name and said she would remember it, but Roland jumped into the conversation with a sharp glare, telling her to stop talking to his boss like that. With a haughty look, Almeria apologized, then seemed shy as she introduced herself to Iris. She informed Roland that his boss had agreed, making Roland sigh and say that Almeria would have to go through a test of her abilities, and that he would be the one to evaluate her. This meant she would have to fight him. Almeria said that was impossible, and that there was no way she could win against Roland. However, she still didn't want to find another guild to join. Roland asked why she was so determined to join this specific guild, until she admitted it was all just an excuse to see him. Finally, they went out into the city streets and prepared for their match. As Almeria and Roland faced each other, the girl raised her blade and declared she would fight seriously to make him acknowledge her. Roland told her to give it her all and wondered if she was even capable of standing before him. He began to stare her down, releasing a heavy aura, which Almeria immediately sensed. She suddenly jumped back, holding her sword in a defensive stance, while Layla observed, thinking that she had a good sense for danger. Unfortunately, the pressure from Roland's killing intent alone was enough to paralyze her. Almeria broke out in a sweat, continuously backing away from the advancing man. As Roland's stare intensified, the girl dropped to her knees in fear, which meant the match was over. She panted in disbelief at how she could have thought she'd gotten stronger. Disappointed that she could only withstand his killing intent for 5 seconds, Roland praised her, saying he really did think she'd gotten stronger. Roland mentioned that back then she would have fainted every time she was hit with his killing intent, and she even wet herself each time, embarrassing Almeria, who tried to insist it was just sweat. Regardless, Roland declared it his victory and said she didn't qualify. causing Almeria to groan in frustration and complain to him before running off, saying that she would be back. She left with a bright smile on her face as she rode away on her horse while the surrounding crowd buzzed and went on with the rest of their day. Roland apologized for all the trouble, and Melia asked about his relationship with the princess. He answered honestly that they had journeyed together to defeat the Demon King. The girl just took it as a joke and laughed, before Roland decided to say he was just Almeria's tutor, which seemed to make sense to Melia, and also explained why he wore glasses. She left looking confident, while all the other staff members also believed his story, making Roland realize he'd just gained a strange title. It was another normal day for Roland at his job. A staff member came up to him, saying he could take over the reception desk, since he was so good at handling people's disputes. Roland called for the next person to come to the counter, and a young boy stepped forward, timidly asking about a quest. He asked to confirm Roland's identity, saying he wanted to be sure because Nail and the other adventurers had spoken well of Roland, and that any quest Roland recommended would never run into trouble. But Roland said he shouldn't believe everything he hears. The boy asked Roland for a quest that suited his abilities, and Roland went to get one, a simple E-rank quest for the adventurer. He looked at the quest and believed he could handle it, but he couldn't help but worry, because he couldn't stand the thought of getting hurt. Roland reassured him, and said that it was normal to worry about such things. Eventually, a girl walked up to the counter and asked for a difficult quest. Roland found a quest that had 2 E-rank adventurers already registered and needed one more person to meet the requirements. He brought the quest to the girl, and she accepted it without hesitation. Roland went to process it and gather the remaining members of the team. By the afternoon, the group had assembled with adventurers named Atro, a spear user, Uno, a sword user, and the girl from before, Everly. They all looked at each other with worried expressions, and told Roland they didn't believe they were actually strong enough to complete the mission. Hearing this, Roland told them they should go somewhere else, and left the reception desk to Melia for a while. While everyone was outside, he explained that he was going to train the group a bit, since they had all signed up for quests that were too difficult for them. They all got angry and felt insulted, trying to say they could manage if they worked together. But Roland responded by summoning small shadow entities that proceeded to defeat the 2 men and take the girl's underwear. Roland laughed at them and called them insects, saying they were weaker than the shadows he summoned, which were already weak. The girl said her skirt had been flipped, and Roland said she should be thankful that's all that happened, as women often go through worse when facing bad people. They needed to determine what they could and could not do, and Roland demanded they say they were weaker than insects, because that would keep them humble and help them gain self-awareness, which would turn into strength. From now on, they would begin training by fighting the shadows. Each member would gradually learn tricks suited to their abilities, while learning to fight against the shadows and become stronger, before preparing for the mission they had signed up for. They seemed like different people. When the man who had proposed the quest asked the group to help him, and they confidently said they would do their best. Back at the guild, Roland returned to the reception desk and saw someone begging the staff for another chance, as he really wanted to become an adventurer. The staff told him to leave because the guild was about to close, and he apologized and did so. Melia explained to Roland that the boy had been asking about this since the day before. However, there was a rule to wait 6 months before reapplying. She also said the boy's skill was strange, and it seemed he didn't know how to use it. But she wanted to change the subject and asked if Roland was free for the day. Unfortunately, he turned her down because he said he still had a lot to do, and that involved going outside the guild and checking on the boy's situation. He explained that the boy needed to become an adventurer because he wanted to help his mother, but he said he wasn't strong enough, even though it was his dream. After seeing Almeria fight, Roland asked the boy to show him his skills, and he demonstrated a skill called Penetrate, which used his sword to extend his attacks further than normal. Roland thought for a moment, before suggesting the boy use the same skill but with a shovel. When he did so, he felt embarrassed, because his skill was only useful for things like digging. However, Roland explained that it was very important and useful, as it would help create safe zones, restoring the boy's confidence. When Roland told him he could take the test, at another guild, Roland initially planned to teach the boy how to handle a spear, but seeing him run off happily made Roland realize that was enough for now. Afterward, another adventurer came over and rudely sat on the desk, demanding a good quest. When Roland suggested he could gather herbs or carry luggage, the man got angry and started yelling at Roland. Suddenly, Neil walked in and slapped the man, telling him not to bother Roland or sit on the desk. Neil apologized to Roland for the man's behavior, until the man realized that Roland was the person Neil was always talking about, and immediately switched to idolizing Roland, but that only made Neil even angrier, and he tried to discipline the man, making the man bow his head again. Neil then asked Roland to tell them about the quest, while our heroes sighed at how troublesome the situation had become. Roland continued to help adventurers at the counter, earning him praise from Milia, but Morley jumped in, saying it was no big deal. Milia tried to argue that it was a big deal, since Roland had been working for less time, but was still an excellent employee. Morley tried to claim he was more popular, but Milia knew he was only popular with people he was close to, causing them both to glare at each other and tell each other to just get back to work. Another staff member told Roland to take a break. He left and was on his way out when he ran into a shadowy figure, who told him that everything was fine with the group he had trained. Iris approached, wanting to know what had happened with Almeria and Baladel. Roland honestly explained everything, which disappointed Iris because she couldn't scold him. She called him an ally of justice, and then told him one last thing before he left, that a group of adventurers had just gotten stronger. He just said that he'd given them advice to avoid a disaster. Iris hummed thoughtfully before telling him that he was helping nobodies become excellent adventurers. Iris tried to invite Roland to dinner again, but he quickly refused, saying he had a cat to take care of. Iris insisted it was about work. He replied that work could be discussed at the office. But before he could leave, she called out that she had an offer for him to become a full-time examiner for the adventurer exam, which piqued his interest. Roland was taking his usual walk through the city in his work uniform when he happened to run into Milia, who caught his eye and ran over. She was panting, trying to catch her breath because he walked so fast, but he was only focused on what she had come for. Milia looked up with a radiant smile and held up a bag, pulling out a carefully wrapped bottle, saying she wanted to celebrate his promotion to full-time examiner. Roland was about to say he was busy, but Milia said that when happy events happen, people should celebrate because that's what's normal. The black-haired man was taken by surprise and immediately agreed to Milia's suggestion, causing her to jump for joy. However, she grew a little worried when she realized Roland would do anything if she told him it was normal. The two walked through the city, chatting together. Milia said that all the staff were surprised to hear the news, since Roland had only been working at the guild for 2 months. She was excited to see him become the guild's first full-time examiner, especially since everyone agreed, for the most part. Roland remembered one person who definitely didn't agree, but Milia told him not to count that person, as it would be strange to oppose the decision after seeing the branch manager's report on him. Milia was also moved by Roland's concern for the young boy from before, and she had sensed a change in the adventurer's attitudes towards recent quests. Neil had also changed a lot, and despite having been an E rank for a long time, he quickly rose to C rank. Roland tried to claim that the adventurer's changes were their own efforts and had nothing to do with him. But Milia said that Iris had said otherwise, and that Roland's sincerity had touched everyone's hearts. This made him stare blankly as Milia tried to convince him that there was something special about him. He asked her why she was so happy, as if she were the one being rewarded. She laughed and said that was exactly it. Since she was his superior, his praise meant she also got some of the credit. As they continued walking, Roland asked Milia about everyone else when she mentioned the celebration. Milia explained that the branch manager would be coming too, and that they would be celebrating at her place. Without a doubt, Roland thought it was normal to celebrate at the home of the person being honored. When they arrived in front of the house, they both saw Iris standing outside awkwardly in a fancy dress, holding a wrapped bottle of wine, leaning and waiting impatiently. She greeted them before handing the bottle to Roland, but Milia was more focused on why Iris was so beautifully made up. Iris insisted it was normal for her, which Roland believed, though Milia knew she was trying her best. Hearing the commotion, Layla came outside to see what was happening and cheerfully greeted Roland, saying it was rare to see him come home with guests. Milia greeted her back, and Iris introduced herself as the guild's branch manager. But Layla already knew who she was, which left Iris flustered. Layla turned to Roland and casually asked if the two women were there to have some fun with him, causing Iris and Milia to jump in shock and embarrassment. Roland immediately denied it and set down the wrapped bottles. Seeing the bottles, Layla realized they were having a party and smiled confidently. Milia quickly asked to borrow the kitchen and an apron, which surprised Iris, who asked if Milia intended to enter her castle, teasing her about her bravery. Milia sighed and asked Layla to show her what she could and couldn't use, then went with Layla to the kitchen while Iris watched, remarking that the two seemed to get along well. Meanwhile, Roland and Iris started setting the table. waiting for the food. Milia lifted the pot lid with a look of surprise and asked the demon girl what she was cooking, then took a taste. Milia sighed in frustration because the dish was too delicious, but still tried to say that something was off and needed improvement, causing the two women to start arguing. Milia tried to push Layla away and told her to move aside for a bit. Layla pouted angrily, but then caught sight of Roland and Iris and went over to hug Roland's arm, introducing herself to the branch manager. Everyone decided to start the party early since it would take some time for Milia to prepare the food. The three of them sat down together at the table. Iris asked Layla about her relationship with Roland, as she was very curious after hearing they had met during their journey. Layla casually replied that she was like Roland's partner, which stunned Iris. Layla told Iris there was no need to panic, as she understood that women often seek out strong men. And as long as Roland returned to her side in the end, she would be satisfied. Roland asked if she had had too much to drink, causing Layla to laugh sheepishly. Iris thought about it and finally understood why Roland had turned down her dinner invitation. Milia finally finished preparing dinner and asked Layla what she had been bragging about in her absence. Layla replied that Milia just needed to bow down to her. Milia complained once again, turning to Roland, trying to convince him that her food was better, and he should choose her instead of Layla. After being rejected again, Milia growled and started chugging a drink she brought. Layla told her that it just wasn't her day. Everyone joined in the celebratory feast, eating delicious food and having drinks, which left Milia and Layla full and fast asleep on the bed, leaving Roland and Iris as the only two still awake. Iris asked Roland if he could still go on, but he didn't answer the question, simply moving closer to her and placing his hand over her drink. They looked at each other in silence. Nobody said anything, before Iris finally leaned in for a kiss. She quickly pulled back when she realized Roland didn't resist and called him a bad boy. Roland didn't object, as he had done wrong things in the past. Iris asked if he was good at capturing women's hearts, and Roland confirmed that he could be if he needed to. Iris began to crawl on top of Roland. The next day, after everyone had left, Roland was getting ready for work when he noticed Layla seemed sick. He had prepared a meal and told her to eat it whenever she felt like it. Layla tried to speak, explaining the possible cause of her condition, but quickly dismissed it and just asked for a kiss. Roland obliged without hesitation and kissed her before leaving for work. Milia found out and was surprised that Layla could get sick. She wondered if Roland could even work at a time like this, which confused him. Until she asked if he had taken Layla to the doctor, Roland said that he hadn't, prompting Milia to tell him he should go home early, because people are vulnerable when they're sick and feel lonelier when they're weak. Milia admitted that if no one took care of her when she was sick, she'd complain about it for a whole year. She went to relay the message to the branch manager, saying that she would make dinner after work, while Roland would take Layla to the doctor and stay with her. Roland left quickly, walking through the city, wondering what he was going to do since he didn't think a human doctor could examine a demon. But just as Roland was about to enter the house, he saw that the door was already open. This made him suspicious, and he entered the silent house on high alert. He slowly advanced into the bedroom, only to find Layla wasn't in bed. Her clothes were still on the bed, while the other dress she usually wore was gone, meaning she had just changed. Roland could feel the bed was still warm, so Layla couldn't be far, and it was unlikely she went shopping since he surely would have seen her on his way back. He noticed traces of magical power on the bed, making Roland wonder if the survivors from the Demon Lord's army had discovered she was alive, or if Layla had regained her powers. But he decided the first possibility seemed more plausible, because if Layla were truly powerful, he would have noticed right away. This meant she was still wearing the collar. The magical power seemed to be heading south, and Roland followed it, taking off his glasses. He noticed that it was heading towards the kingdom of Badenhark, or the kingdom of Eurovinson. It passed through the city and into a dense forest, stopping in a certain area. As Roland looked up and took a moment to sense the energy, he quickly found it. Roland approached the place where he felt the strange presence and called the person out. A dark elf girl appeared, smiling and saying she was wondering who had been following her, only to realize it was a human. Roland wasn't frightened by the news of her race, just sighing as he confirmed that it was just a dark elf, which made the girl look offended. He told the dark elf that Layla must be safe and demanded she return her to him, but she didn't seem to want to talk to him. The dark elf girl had wanted to thank Roland for hiding Layla, but he just replied calmly that it was nothing, which angered her again and she tried to attack. Roland quickly dodged all the attacks, while telling her she should be on her guard. The girl laughed and said she wouldn't be easily fooled by a human's trick. But there really was something behind her. Roland had summoned small shadows to attack her, The girl was surprised and bewildered to see a human who could use 4th-level magic. He explained that Layla had taught him and called the dark elf inferior to a human, making her even angrier. As Roland summoned more shadows, the dark elf said that the maximum number should only be 6, and wondered if the shadows had their own consciousness based on the way they moved. Roland simply said that he was controlling all of them. The girl angrily slammed her blade into the ground, causing the shadows to flee in fear. But she didn't see Roland approaching, and simply tapped her on the forehead, sending her flying into a tree. Roland looked over and saw Layla, but the dark elf was about to wake up, so Roland decided to use a bit of magic to stop her from interfering. After doing so, Roland went to Layla's side and dispelled the magic that had been cast on her, causing her to slowly wake up, and dazedly asked why Roland was there. She explained that her subordinate was asking a favor of her, and that it would be faster for her to explain, wondering where the girl, Rosie, had gone, since she was supposed to have carried her while she was in a deep sleep. Roland called Rosie over, and Layla realized that the dark elf was under a true nightmare spell, and was acting like a dog. Layla found it amusing, but Rosie was still her subordinate. Rosie wanted Roland to dispel the magic, and he did so. Rosie dazedly wondered why she had been acting like a dog, while Roland asked if she had fun. However, Rosie got angry at his words and drew her weapon until Layla told her to stop, saying she wouldn't let anyone touch her husband. The dark elf girl was confused, as she didn't understand what the word husband meant, so Layla explained that she shouldn't underestimate this man. Layla said that she couldn't even last 30 minutes against him, and had surrendered after just 10, shocking Rosie because the time was getting shorter and shorter. Suddenly, Roland jumped in and said that Layla didn't even last 5 minutes the first time, flustering Layla, who lightly slapped him, asking him not to mention that in front of her subordinate. Layla explained to Rosie that she had accepted Roland and vowed to devote herself to him, but Rosie still felt she couldn't accept Roland. Getting back to the point, Roland asked Rosie why she tried to take Layla away, and with a nod from Layla, Rosie began to explain. She had found Layla's body and immediately realized it was a fake, because it didn't have the mole on her butt. Layla laughed and said she didn't have a mole like that, but both Rosie and Erlin agreed that there really was one. Rosie continued, saying that after several months had passed, some members of the demon army had proposed attacking the humans again to avenge the demon lord's defeat. She wanted everyone to know that Layla was actually alive, so the extremists would lose their reason to fight. Rosie even believed that retreating was a wise decision. The person currently preparing to lead the invasion is someone named Corneliu Vazari, a name that Layla seemed to recognize. Humans may think the war is over, but for the demons, it's far from finished. Originally, demons lived on a separate continent called Makai, but one day they invaded the humans after using teleportation magic. The demons continued to try and seize as much territory as possible until the 7 kings formed an allied force to defend against the main forces, while a special group of heroes would infiltrate the castle and defeat the demon king. However, many demons still lurked around the castle area, which is why a portion of the allied forces still guards that area. Roland told Layla that she probably wouldn't be able to stop them, which she already knew, but still wanted to believe they would listen to her as their demon king. She said that the war the demons started was a mistake, and that Layla wanted to atone for her sins, as her final responsibility as the demon king. Roland promised he would do whatever he could to help her. Layla was conflicted, since she didn't want humans to find out he hadn't killed her, but Roland insisted that he had killed the demon king, but that he didn't want anyone to kill her. As Layla came to terms with his words, the demon girl burst into tears and hugged Roland tightly while Rosie was moved by the scene before her. The 3 of them traveled together through the forest, heading towards a gate that Rosie had set up near a hut. It used teleportation magic and would lead them to a place where Rosie explained there were likely more than 2,000 individuals, including monsters, which would overwhelm the security forces around the castle. They were close to the hut, but when they arrived, they discovered that the gate had been destroyed. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the air, causing everyone to turn and see. A small individual sitting on a nearby hill, asking Rosie what she was doing with a human. The stranger was called Delacroix, and Layla stepped forward to call her name, announcing that it was her, and that she wanted to speak with Corneliu. Delacroix gritted her teeth and told Layla to shut up, saying that even if Layla was truly alive, it didn't matter anymore. The small demon used magic to transform into a dragon and began to prepare a breath attack. When Roland asked Rosie if she could block Delacroix's attack, she replied that she could, but only once. Relieved, Roland then asked her to protect the useless woman, Layla, which offended both girls, even though it wasn't entirely wrong given the situation. Rosie immediately used her magic to create a shield for herself and Layla, boasting that no one could possibly do anything to Delacre. But when they opened their eyes, Roland was gone. The dragon unleashed its attack, but both girls survived. Rosie wondered where Roland had gone, questioning if he had run away. However, Roland had reappeared right in front of Delacre. The beast was stunned and tried to launch an attack at Roland, but he simply summoned a small ball of fire, sending it flying toward the dragon. Delacre's was forced back, but it wasn't enough. Roland relentlessly attacked Delacre, forcing the monster out of its dragon form and causing it to fall to the ground, unconscious. Rosie was furious that Roland had defeated Delacre so easily, but now the three of them needed a new way to get to the isolated island. Layla had an idea and asked if Roland could learn this magic. Roland confidently replied that he could, as long as it wasn't as complex as shadow magic. One lesson later, Roland easily summoned a portal, leaving Rosie to hang her head and sigh, wondering how a human could possibly do such a thing. She lamented about how hard she had trained to learn magic, and Layla tried to comfort her by saying that Roland was just a man more talented than even the demon race, which seemed to ease the dark elf's mind a little. When it was time to go, the three of them held hands, as Roland chanted the spell and teleported them to their destination, earning praise from Layla. They finally arrived near the meeting place, and Rosie warned Roland not to do anything reckless. But he just asked if he should kill all the demons, since there were only about 2,000 of them. Rosie laughed and told him he could try if he wanted. Layla told the dark elf to stop, insisting that Roland wasn't joking. But that only left Rosie feeling confused. They would move out after a short while, and Layla told Roland she wanted to talk to them before he decided to kill anyone, as she didn't want anyone else to die if it could be avoided. A short time later, it was time to move, but Rosie quickly realized there were no guards at the tower they planned to pass through. As they got closer, they heard roars and cheers, making the dark elf realize that today was the day of action, something they hadn't informed her about. Roland explained that the dragon was probably just keeping an eye on her, since they never trusted her. But she still wanted to believe they could do it, especially since they had a doctor to check on Layla's condition. The three of them climbed up and saw the massive army gathering, but Layla still tried to stand firm and got everyone's attention, announcing that she was still alive. Rosie tried to support her, and everyone started to cheer as Layla apologized and said they should stop their revenge and return to Makai, leaving all the demons confused, because no one believed that the real Layla would say such a thing. None of the demons could sense any magical power from Layla due to her necklace, and they began to suspect she wasn't the real Layla. All the demons went back to cheering with excitement and a thirst for revenge. They were about to have a war against the humans. Roland and Layla realized that the army was heading towards the area where Miley lived, which meant she would be in danger. Layla tried to get their attention again, but no one looked her way. Layla fell to her knees, still trying to make someone hear her, but her cries were drowned out by the army's cheers. The demons in the army roared with cheers while Layla and Rosie watched and Roland hid behind a rock. Rosie tried to comfort Layla until she'd had enough and stood up with an angry expression, yelling at everyone not to underestimate her. She declared that it wasn't that she didn't have magical power, but that she no longer needed it because she had learned the world's strongest skill: instant death. Cornelius scoffed and said she was lying, but Layla simply replied by telling him to return to the demon world, saying it was her final warning. He continued confidently, telling the other demons to ignore her as they would rebuild the Demon King's army and conquer the human nations. Layla called him a fool and said he'd always been that way, which was also why he used to be so reliable. She raised her hand and Roland prepared to summon an attack, so she could strike Cornelio. In just a few seconds, as tears rolled down Layla's cheeks, Cornelio also began to cry, calling out to Layla weakly, finally realizing she wasn't a fake before he died. When he died, all the demons in the army wept for his passing. They were confused, not understanding what had happened, and why Cornelio's own sword had pierced its master. But with enough whispers and thought, the demons began to believe that Layla was indeed their former leader, all thanks to the magic that Roland had secretly used to help her. Layla stood at the edge of the cliff and ordered everyone to obey her, or they would meet the same fate as Cornelio. Everyone obeyed without a hint of hesitation or complaint, and in time, all of them would be sent back to the demon world through the portal Rosie created. Layla was talking to Roland, asking how he knew what she was thinking. He just replied calmly that it was obvious, since only he could do something like that. She chuckled and said he did a great job substituting for her skill, but that wasn't the priority. Roland remembered that the army should have a doctor and wondered if they were going to return. Layla assured him that the doctors would be on standby in the barracks during this time. Even though his expression seemed blank, he was still worried about Layla's health, which made her try to tease him. But it didn't affect him much. He told her they should go get a checkup, but she suddenly let go of Roland's hand and said she needed to go by herself, leaving him confused as she walked away. Roland stared into the distance when Rosie came over and got his attention, asking where Layla went. Roland explained that she had just gone to see the doctor and probably didn't want anyone else to see her. Rosie laughed and said she didn't want to be associated with people like him, as Layla was said to trust the dark elf woman deeply. Compared to Roland, Rosie just kept bragging about herself and asked if he wanted to hear about her stories and memories with Layla. But he was completely uninterested, though she continued without any hesitation. A while later, Rosie finished her story and the number of demons passing through the portal began to decrease, meaning there was only a little time left until everyone had retreated. Rosie was still amazed by Layla's power, believing that the skill she had used earlier was Layla's own power. This led Rosie to warn Roland that he should be careful not to let Layla get into a bad mood. She also mentioned that he might get killed, since he was of no more value to her, but Roland just looked at Rosie with pity. Because she didn't know that he was the one who had created the attack, Roland wanted to ask Rosie one thing. Why was she willing to do so much for Layla, when dark elves had absolutely nothing to do with demons? His words surprised her, as it seemed he didn't know much about how the Demon Lord was chosen. He already knew that the Demon Lord wasn't chosen through genetics, but despite that, Rosie explained that Layla was still the daughter of the previous Demon Lord and had become the Demon Lord herself. Layla had always shown exceptional talent since she was a child, and allowed no one to object when she became the Demon Lord, leading Roland to believe that others who aspired to the position must have held grudges. Rosie, with a gentle expression, admitted that she and many others would also sacrifice themselves for Layla. There was one more thing Roland wanted to ask, which made Rosie wonder if he was a liar. But he went on to ask who had ordered her to do all those things. If she were like the moderates, she would have stayed with the others in the demon world and considered Therotical's actions as merely something to take note of. He asked her the purpose of going through so much trouble to find Layla and inform her about the rebellion. Rosie replied that she was simply following the orders of Layla's father, the Great Lord. She had informed the Great Lord of Layla's condition, and he had told her to tell Layla about the rebellion, as she would likely try to stop it. This made Roland realize that Layla's father couldn't just sit back and let the extremists die for nothing. The Dark Elf girl said it was surprising that Layla had become so helpless, but fortunately there was a reliable man by her side. Hearing these words, Rosie felt confused and said that those were just Layla's words, but Roland changed the subject and said it was time to check on Layla. They arrived at the camp and asked the doctor about Layla's condition, but the old woman just told them to go and see for themselves. Roland and Rosie entered the building and saw Layla lying under the covers, feeling embarrassed about her condition. Layla was uncomfortable explaining things with Rosie there, so Roland pushed the Dark Elf out. After a moment of hesitation, Layla told Roland that she was just testing some new recipes a few days ago and did a lot of taste tests, only to discover that the ingredients were bad. Roland asked Layla if she was slow on the uptake, which made her even more flustered, but all Roland knew was that he was happy to see her safe. Layla was confused as to why only she got poisoned when they both ate the same dish. Roland explained that a little poison wouldn't affect him, as he had been trained to withstand it. She felt unintentionally offended, thinking he was saying her food was poisonous, but he confirmed that it was. Even so, Roland patted her head and said that she didn't need to worry when talking to him, and that she could try out new recipes again.